Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Buddha. For those of you that have not had the opportunity to sit with me for tea, I hope that happens. I hope once things get more sane, we can have a bowl of tea together in person and have a hug as well when hugging is permitted again. In the meantime, we get to meet like this virtually. We get to use technology. There's some benefits to that I see, and that this teachings can land in your life, in your home, and you can use them at your own pace and in your own way. So first I want to introduce a little bit about this course itself before we get started. First and foremost, if you have any glitches, if you lose connection to this live stream, if anything goes wrong, don't worry. We are going to be posting a version of these videos onto the course website after each session. So probably within an hour or two after each session, there'll be a version that will be posted. And the posted version actually will be higher res, better quality video, probably better audio as well. So you can use that. And that also means that if you are somewhere in the world where this time is not so suitable for you and you find yourself staying up really late just to watch these live, I would suggest maybe don't do that and watch the videos at the time that is most suitable for you and your life. Part of the benefit of teaching through this medium is that it can land into your life, into your schedule, into your home, and you can integrate these teachings in whatever way you see fit, at whatever time is good for you, and at the pace that you want. Maybe you don't want to watch the whole 2 hours in one go, you want to watch 1 hour and then the next hour the next day. So you want to take 14 days to go through this 7-day course, or a month, or 2 months. That's entirely up to you. So don't worry about any glitches or anything like that. Yeah, so just watch at your own pace. And we'll be putting videos up. So if you do get dropped from the web browser, don't worry about that. The format of this course is all about Cha Dao, which is the way of tea. So we're going to be focusing on a life of tea, a way of life that incorporates tea as part of living spiritual cultivation. And so each day we'll be dividing the course into 2 parts, heaven and earth. The heaven part will be more philosophical, conceptual, more guidance in terms of life wisdom, in terms of how to land tea in a life of practice. And then the second half will be earth, which will be practical things, actual, stuff like today we're going to talk about how to hold the bowl, etc. So the course will be divided along these lines, and we're going to have forums in each day. So when you go into each day, you'll have the video, you'll have some supplementary materials, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then you'll have the forum. And the forum's going to be divided into heaven and earth also. And what would be really helpful for us is if you keep your discussions and questions on topic. So keep your questions and discussions if you're in the heaven discussion, then talk about those topics. If you're in the earth for that day 1, then talk about those topics only. And in the top right of the screen, I'm informed you can click on something, and that's how you start a thread, a question or a topic for discussion. But I want you to stay on topic. The reason is because if you're asking, first of all, the conversation will go in 8,000 different directions if everybody's just asking all kinds of questions. And second of all, perhaps the question that you're really curious about is going to be answered in a future day. So we're on day 1 and you're asking a question, and that question is going to be answered on day 3. So this is why it's really important to stay on topic. Then at the end of the course, we will have a forum that's called miscellaneous. And in that forum, you'll be able to then ask any question that was not answered throughout the 7-day teaching. But during the course, let's stay on topic. Let's in the forums, let's keep the discussion and conversation and questions on topic. And we will moderate this forum for a month. So if you're watching at a slower pace and you still want to be able to ask questions and discuss, the forum will be moderated for a month. We decided to lift the 1 month cap on the access to this course. So now you'll have access to this course potentially indefinitely, at least for a while, at least probably a year. So part of that was just cost and of the hosting and the logistics of all that. So you will have access to the course for longer than a month, but we're only going to moderate the forum for a month and then we're going to close it. So after that, you'll just be able to read it and have access to all the materials. Each day, I will be putting up homework. I'll discuss today's homework at the end. It will include questions to think about, exercises you can do. Starting today, we're also going to include a 1 hour recorded meditation instructions. There's going to be 2 or 3 meditation instructions throughout this course. So you could meditate an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, or just 1 hour, or however you like. All of these exercises and questions and slogans and homework, it's all up to you. It's all voluntary. Don't feel compelled to do it. This course is not a retreat. We're not all together in person. So for better or for worse, the course is landing in your space, in your life, and you have complete control over it. There are really positive benefits to that, as I said, because when we go to a retreat, when we get back home, we have to figure out how to integrate what we've learned into our life, and sometimes it can fall apart. But in this case, the teachings are landing in your life already, and so you could maybe integrate them as you go, which is quite powerful, I think. So, but all of the homework will be voluntary. So each day we'll have some supplementary materials, maybe some articles from the magazine that will be up for reading, some links to some videos we suggest you watch. There'll be this homework every day, this homework page which has the questions and the exercises and a slogan, and and the meditation instructions. So those will be the extracurricular stuff. So that's kind of the format of this course. My aim is to very much deepen and inspire your tea practice, and to make this the opportunity for you to deepen your self-cultivation through tea, or to begin a practice of tea and do so in real life. So I'm going to be very much focusing on things you can actually utilize to make changes for your own good and for your loved ones, not some kind of entertainment. It's not my hope to just like spend 7 days talking at you. I want to empower you. I want to fill you with stuff you can use, and also empty you, which we'll talk about soon. So I always start my courses with the old Chinese saying, right? If you give a man a pear, you change his day. If you teach him to knock pears from the tree, then you change his life. The real saying's about fish, but I don't eat fish, so you get pears, and I'm going to teach you how to knock pears from a tree, and so that you can walk away from this and have some tools to travel in your journey with a bit more peace and grace and wisdom and compassion. So that is the aim of this practice. That's also the aim of this course, and where we're headed. So I hope it proves fruitful for all of us. I hope that we all grow through these teachings, and that then afterwards they ripple out into our lives and change who we are and how we see the world and how we live. And I hope that then those teachings help us to serve others. And then like that, love can change the world bowl by bowl. Like that, our tea practice can be one department in the office of the corporation Save the Earth and Save Humanity. So, the first and foremost discussion that we have to have is similar to the vein of this introduction, is like a little sprout shooting off of it, a little tea sprout, which is about my role. It's very important that I establish where I'm coming from and what I can and can't do for you. We have to seal that contract before we can go any further. It's important to me. And my teacher used to always use like legal language. Part of that was just that English wasn't his first language, and part of it was funny, and part of it was just insightful as well. The legal language he would use would be like, we're going to make a contract, and I'm going to explain to you what I can and can't do for you as a teacher, what your obligations are as a student, and then if you don't follow that contract, you can get a lawyer. Right? So we've signed where we're coming from. If I tell you where I'm coming from, both in terms of myself as a teacher and in terms of the teachings themselves, first of all, it could help you to understand and unpack those teachings, but second of all, it can prevent any misunderstandings, and I will have stated my part. Okay? So I am a Zen and Tea teacher. I am not in an Indian lineage. There's nothing wrong with those lineages. If that's the kind of medicine that you need, then you can get that medicine in the world. But I am not a guru. I'm not a holy man. I'm a lover of that which is holy. This train carries no one holy. This train is bound to glory. I'm a lover of the light, but I'm not of it. I'm not above you in any way. I don't have any special talents. My mind is not filled with superpowers. My greatest superpower is that I don't have any superpowers. I can't uplift you or help you or do anything for you. The state of my mind has no bearing on the state of your mind. I am not to be put on a pedestal. I refuse to play the king of the heap game. I'm not above anything or anyone. That's not the way of tea. That's not the way of Zen. In tea, we all sit on the floor. All of us. I'm sitting on the floor right now. Maybe you're in a chair. That's okay. But I'm not higher or better. There is no authority. There is no above or below. My teacher always used to say that in Zen, the only masters are those who have passed away. The rest of us are students. We are students for life. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So, when I've passed away, then you can call me Tea Master. Until then, I'm a student, an elder friend, a brother. What I have for you is guidance. What I have for you is some tools that you can use. I want to empower you, not empower myself. I don't want to empower myself through your eyes. I'm not interested in being on your pedestal, nor being knocked off it. I don't want to be put down or put up. I just want to look at you eye to eye. Equal. Just a friend who has guidance and who has tools that will empower you in your life. This is important because, there is sometimes some reverence for that which changes us, and that's a positive thing. But you should understand that any good qualities that you see in me, were not born in me. They were not some, ability or talent. What all they are is a long-term association with Zen and Tea. That is what has transformed me. And so all the wisdom and positive qualities that are in my life come from that long-term association with Zen and Tea. And so it is to that we all bow. It's not myself. If you look at the finger instead of the moon that it's pointing at, you betray the sign. Because to honor the sign, you have to follow it to where it goes, because that's its function. The function of the sign is to point the way. And so I am the sign. I use tea as my signpost. You honor me by following that signpost, not by sitting down and staring at the signpost or revering it. All that you revere in me, any good quality you see in me, comes from long-term association with Zen and Tea. And it is that long-term association with Zen and Tea that qualifies me to teach you, not some attainment or specialness or holiness or mastery of anything. It's just a long-term association, right? I've practiced these things for many years, and I have the ability to articulate the experiential and practical and philosophical aspects of them through that association. Just like a husband can describe his wife to a stranger better than another stranger could. Why? Because he knows her well, because he's been around her a long time. That doesn't mean he is her, it just means he's been around her a long time. I've been around Zen and Tea for a long time, and so I can talk about them, but don't confuse me for them. And my story and who I am is not important. Zen and Tea are what is important. They are what were here long before I got here, and they will be here long after I'm gone, and my life is devoted to them. So if you want to know me, then you know them. That's the way. It's the way forward. That's important to me. It's also important to me that you understand my relationship to teachings, both as a student and as a teacher, because this will help them land in your life and help them land for you. Teachings to me are not arguments. I'm not trying to tell you the way things are. I'm not trying to tell you the way you should be. I'm not trying to give you lists of do's and don'ts. Sometimes inspirational talk, is kind of like a coach, and it can come off that way, but that's not the intention of my heart of hearts. So I'm not trying to preach. I'm trying to empower. And teachings to me are invitations to explore. They are questions. They are opportunities, not answers. So each one is a doorway, and that doorway leads to 15 other questions. In Zen we say, right, little doubt means little awakening. No doubt, no awakening. Great doubt, great awakening. You could also translate this as questioning. No questioning, no awakening. Great questioning, great awakening. Questioning is a very important power. So teachings to me are questions. You can put a question mark after every teaching I give in these 7 days. You can criticize them. You can approach them in any way you want. They are invitations to explore aspects of your life, aspects of tea, aspects of Zen, aspects of the world, not stances. So there's no argument. There's no, hey, this is the way things are, and then your job is to say, wait a minute, right? Your job is to not say, wait a minute, like that. Your job is to say, wait a minute, like that. That kind of wait a minute. Not, hey, wait a minute, but wait a minute. And then off go your questions. And hopefully those questions lead to application, to living change. Not just a pear, but knocking pears from trees. So that's where I'm coming from as a teacher. That's where I'm coming from in terms of teachings. Our contract is signed. If you do otherwise with these teachings or with my person, you do so without my permission, and we are in breach of contract. If we understand that, it will make everything go a lot smoother. And that segues perfectly into our first lesson, because a huge part of Cha Dao, a huge part, I don't know what percent, it doesn't matter, but a huge part of Cha Dao is not teachable. A huge part of Cha Dao is not in a book. It's not in a course. It's not in a teacher. It's in your heart. A huge part of what Cha Dao is has nothing to do with anything that we can learn together. I can point at it, and I'm going to try today, in this first day, to point at the part of the tea experience that really is, you could say, the foundation, the most important part, and it's not teachable because it doesn't have a form, it doesn't have a method, it doesn't have a way. There's no way to talk about it even really. I can just use metaphors and analogies and point at it. But really, you have to find it in yourself. I'm going to use two analogies that are useful, have been useful to me. But again, these are just signposts. This foundation of Cha Dao, of the way of tea, this foundation is Dao. And Dao can be realized, but it cannot be known. So you can't conceptualize it. You can't make a belief system out of it. You can't turn my analogy or metaphors into stances or methods. You can just kind of follow them ambiguously. They're kind of like ambiguous in the sense that like, it's somewhere over there. When you ask somebody directions on the street and they don't give you specific ones, the specific instructions will come later in this course, but there's a huge part of tea that it's more just like, somewhere over there. And so we can just use metaphors. It's something you have to find in yourself. It's not something you can teach, that I can say and you can hear. You have to just find it. So I'm going to try with a couple analogies to get to this big part of tea, the big part of tea that can't be taught. That's not in a book, not in a course, not in a teacher, but in your heart. And the first analogy I would like to use is listening. Tea is about listening. When I say listening, I don't mean just with the ears. I mean, I'm using this as metaphorically because I don't have the language. But listening with the whole being. The whole being is listening. The sensations on the body, the taste, the nose, the ears, everything, the mind, all 6 senses, listening. Tea is about listening, listening. And that skill of listening is not something that you can be taught, because it is about less, not more. It is about decrease, not increase. It is about emptying, not filling. So how do I fill you with more emptiness? How do I increase your decrease? How do I teach you to be more of a student? Because this is a lifelong studentship. The path of tea, progress is measured in increased studentship, not increased skill. That's the opposite direction. In Sanskrit, the word for wisdom is prajna. Pra means before and nya is knowledge. This is often translated in Zen as the beginner's mind. So the beginner's mind is the goal, that mind of openness, receptivity, right? That is, the more that increases, the further you're traveling. So it's not like other things where you develop know-how and skill. Actually, all the know-how and skill can get in the way of this part of tea. It can get in the way. It can prevent the listening. We all know that it's hard for a know-it-all to listen. They don't listen very well because they think they already have the answers. So the more you know, it can be an obstacle to listening. And progress in tea and Zen is measured in this emptiness, this listening. And this listening is with the whole being. That's the first analogy that I can give you. The second analogy that I can use is an analogy of bowing. Now, this analogy we have to unpack a little bit, because gestures like bows, there are two things. There's the physical gesture, and then there's the energy, the heart that motivates that gesture. Like a smile. There's a smile that is in the heart, and then involuntarily the face does this. Even babies do it. Babies have a heart that is smiling, and then there's a natural expression of that feeling. An involuntary natural expression of that feeling, like a sneeze. It just happens when you feel that way. But then later in life, we learn how to politically smile. How to make the gesture even though the feeling is not there. Like for a camera. Or, for some other reason. We could smile even at something we hate. So the gesture itself is not what I mean. I don't mean just the bow. There's a feeling that creates a bow. Confusingly, you could also use the bow to get to the feeling, just like you could use the smile to maybe stimulate that feeling. But it's really the feeling that is the metaphor for the part of tea that is not teachable. What I'm saying in essence is that if you want to learn Cha Dao, step 1, in fact, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you want to learn this way, you have to learn to bow. If you can bow well, you're halfway in your practice of Cha Dao. And when I say bow, I don't just mean the actual act of bowing. I mean the feeling that would make a person want to bow. The state of mind that a bow comes out of. That state of mind is what I'm talking about. That's the listening state of mind. That's the we say gasho. A gasho is a full bow with the hands together. If you can gasho, we're already halfway there. And when I say if you can gasho, I don't just mean can you do this. You could do this all day long with your body. I'm talking about the state of being that creates that gesture. The state of being that gesture is a natural expression of. The way that a smile is a natural expression of joy and happiness, a bow is a natural expression of a certain energy. I'll do my best to describe that energy now. It's the same as the listening. It's the same as the listening. And we could talk about it forever and only just point at it ambiguously, right? So listening, bowing, that gesture of bowing comes out of a certain state of mind. What are the qualities of that state of mind? Well, first and foremost, the quality of that state of mind, as I mentioned, is receptivity. Readiness to receive. That's the listening state. A receptivity is progress in tea. There's nowhere to get in tea. There's these proverbs in Japan, they're called ichigyomono. They're like on scrolls, and they usually have to do with Buddhism, and they're like little slogans. And there's a lot of them to do with tea, and they're hung on scrolls in the tea room even. And one of them is I Dao Shi Dao I, which means 1 to 10 to 1. And what that means is that in tea, we progress from 1 to 10, and then guess what? We just go right back to 1. There's nowhere to get to. There's nothing to add. If you're adding to your tea practice, you're going the wrong direction, because the foundation of tea is studentship, better receptivity, better openness, better listening, not just to teachers, but to the whole world, which is a teacher. The world is a better teacher than anyone. Everything humanity knows, be it scientific, spiritual, or any other field, we have learned from observing this universe, obviously. And there's no teaching given by any human on earth that can compare to the teachings of the mountains that have been doing so for billions of years. There's no chant as holy, even the Almighty Heart Sutra, as the light from those stars that's traveled through billions of light years of space to get to our eyes. Chanting every night. All that is sacred, all that is real. So listening is equivalent to learning. The more you listen, the more you learn. And the more you grow. The more you stop listening, the more you start stagnating and stop growing. The more out of tune you are with nature, because in nature, living things grow continuously until they perish. And then they become the growth of other living things. So life is always growing. We call that scientific evolution, from species to species. This being dies and becomes the food for this being, which becomes the food for this being, which becomes the food. You can watch this happen in a 5-minute period. You could watch 2 spiders come out, they fight, one kills the other one, then this one's all confident, and then a lizard eats that, and then a bird eats the lizard, and so on and so on. So it's always growing in terms of the individual being, but it's also growing in terms of the energy being moved, and also then as the species evolve, it is also growing over very long periods. So nature is growing. And when we're in harmony with that, we are also ever growing. And if you're ever receptive, you're ever learning, you're ever growing, you're ever changing, right? A real good sign that your receptivity is opening, that you're doing the right things in your spiritual practice, that your meditation and tea practice are working, and the receptivity is open. A really good sign of that is wonder. You had that wonder when you were a child and you were growing. You were curious. You were open. Everything was wow, wow. That wow is a sign that the tea practice or the Zen practice is working, that the receptivity is opening. If you're having aha, wow. When people start often learning spiritual techniques or reading spiritual books, they start having these aha, wow, more and more, wow, wow, wow. And the curiosity that was there when we were kids starts to return to us, because that is a beautiful gift. And the loss of it was like clouds obfuscating the sun, is like closing things. The way that a know-it-all closes, the way that when you know things just constrict and you're not open anymore and you're not listening. So receptivity is the first quality of the mind, the heart mind, that creates a bow. We bow out of receptivity. And I'm not talking about the physical gesture. Again, this is very important. I'm talking about the state of mind. The gesture is just an expression of that state of mind. The way that a wave is an expression of a high feeling or a bye feeling. The way that a smile is an expression of happiness. Okay? So that bow comes from receptivity. That's the first thing. The second aspect of that is humility. A bow comes out of humility, out of humbleness, out of recognizing that there is so much above me. So much above me. And my power is small and dependent and little. And the more that I put myself beneath things, the more those things flow into me. I'm not talking about some kind of modesty that you wear as clothes to be all cool and spiritual, or to be political and fit in and work well with others. I'm talking about a genuine humility, a genuine understanding of lowliness, meekness, of how powerless we all are in this giant universe. And we are so fragile. In just a short, brief flash of time, you and I will not exist ever again, forever. We are surrounded by an infinite amount of potential suffering and an infinite amount of circumstances that we have no control over. And it's big, this universe is big. And the more humble I stay, the more I'm in harmony with my place in this. Because my place in this is small, not big. My importance in this is small. And all the arrogance and fear and ego of our lives prevents us often from experiencing that sensation that this universe is not about me. It never was. And my rightful place is as a servant to it and a lowly one. Not a beat myself up, I'm so guilty. Not that kind of humbleness either. Not self-loathing. Not that kind of humbleness. That's not humbleness. That's guilt. That's an obstacle, a chain. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about my rightful place in this universe, which is as a lowly servant. And a beautiful, beautiful one. So that humility is very important. And then the third quality that I'm going to discuss, there are many more, of the energy that creates a bow, of that state of mind, is reverence. Reverence for the sacred, reverence for the holy in nature. Connecting to that is a big part of listening. It's a big part of where bowing comes from. So if you can create that energy of reverence, respect for this world that created you over billions of years, for this stardust that is my body, for each other, for all the life on this earth, for the beings that sacrifice themselves so I can live. If I don't take advantage unconsciously and wound nature or wound that which is natural in myself, I'm left only with respect and humility and receptivity. And the more that we have that, the more you want to bow physically. Like the more you feel that way, the more you want to express it in a bow. And if you can bow, if you can do that, you understand what T is about. T is about listening. And so I can't fill you with it. I won't be doing my job. I can't teach you how to do that because it's an emptying. You can't fill an empty. You can't increase a decrease. You have to learn to listen. And that's what T is teaching us. That's what this path is all about, is learning to listen. Learning to bow. And that's always just come back to that. In fact, all the method sits on that foundation. And if that foundation is missing, that method is vacuous. And that's where there's a lot of shame in T. One of the great masters in the whole history of the T world, dating back thousands of years, one of the constellations in the sky of us tea lovers is Baisao, the old tea seller, Zen master and tea monk. And he said, tea contains the essence of nature. It's too bad they all just prattle on about its flavor and color. So if you have that flavor and color and pots and bowls and methods and things, and you don't have that essence of nature, then you have the cha, but you don't have the Tao. And the Tao part is not teachable. There's no method, because it's about listening. It's not about talking, it's not about serving, it's not about doing. It's about being, and it's about listening. And I can't use any other, no matter how many metaphors I give you, you have to take those steps and get to that place yourself. You can't use philosophy or thinking to get yourself there. Thinking won't get you there, as we're going to talk about in a minute. So I think that's enough for analogies. I've described as best I can the state of mind that Zen and Tea are aiming at, trying to encourage, catalyze. So where we can go from here is to then, I can talk to you a little bit about some of the things that you should be listening for and some of the benefits of listening. I've talked about the qualities of that state of mind and I guess what it's like to be in that state of mind. Now I can talk a little bit about what to listen for, and then I will talk about how that listening can impact and benefit your life, and then that will be the conclusion of our heaven part of today's teaching, and we'll move on to some practical things. So what to listen for? I'm going to talk about 3 things to listen for that are very important shifts in a human's life. And it's very important to me that my practice, my approach is very truth-oriented. So I'm not looking to create mythopoetic systems between myself and the world, not at least relative to this discussion. We might come back to that in another day, but rather to observe what's there, to listen to what is really there. So the things that we need to listen for aren't made up things in our mind. They're things that are out there. You just need the instruments to discover them. The way that galaxies are out there, and we just need to have the telescope, and then we look, and boom, there it is. It didn't appear the moment we looked through the telescope. It was already there. We just had to look and discover it. There are aspects of life and nature and truth and oneself that are there if you listen. And it's these 3 that I want to talk about. But again, don't turn these into a philosophy. You have to actually hear them. I'm just helping to guide you to point the direction to some of the important things that you need to listen for. First step, of course, is listening, bowing, being able to listen. And then second step is, what are we listening for? Now, there are many things. There are including personal things that I couldn't possibly for each person. We'll talk about that in the end. But Three things I think that are the most important things we need to listen for, that are the most transformative when you hear them. The first thing that we need to learn to listen for through our meditation, through our tea practice, the first frequency we need to tune into, the first station. Again, the station's already there, 95.3 FM. It's there all the time. You just need to turn the dial there and you can hear it. And you have the instruments to do so. So the first important station we need to turn our dial to is the truth, the fundamental truth that I am not my thoughts. I'm the one who thinks. I'm not the sounds, I'm the one who hears. I'm not the smells, I'm the one who smells. But I'm not my thoughts. We are taught that kind of unconsciously, subliminally, through life, we are imbibed with the sensation that and it diffuses in us, that we are our thoughts, that our thoughts are the center of our life. And they're not. And I think a really good analogy for understanding this is to, in brief, sketch the history of thought itself for all of humanity, because I think it is very applicable as a loose metaphor. It will be oversimplistic, but as a loose metaphor for our own relationship to our thoughts and why we need to hear ourselves experientially that I am not my thoughts, that my thoughts are not the center of my world. So let's look at the little bit, just very briefly. I'm going to go over it just in 3 steps over thousands of years. It's very sweeping, this. But let's look very sweepingly at the history of thought just as a metaphor to how it relates to myself. So you have animals, going back all the way to single-cell organisms for millions of years, animals, they are just flow. They are just dynamic. They are just change. They are all in the present moment. A hawk, a worm, there's no abstract thought, there's just flow. There's just the dynamics of the moment and their instinctual relationship to what is happening right now. And, if you want to use a mechanistic approach to it, their programming, right? But their instincts and how they're relating to what's happening in their environment this moment. And that's it, just the flow of the universe as it's changing and growing. What made us unique, what empowered us, was when we developed the ability to have abstract thoughts, to look at the flow of this universe and see patterns. Seeing patterns, we can see laws, and we can work with it, and we can start to create tools to change that flow. But the ability to create abstract thought is in essence the beginning of sentience, which is the beginning of human history and what makes us unique. And it's powerful and beautiful and wonderful. And so then that's step one in our sweeping oversimplification as we run through the history of human thought. And then step two, humans then started observing nature more and more and more, and getting involved more and more and more, and creating more and more tools and clothes and houses and all of this, and systems for living and working together with other humans in larger and larger groups. And in the beginning, those systems were all based on natural patterns, including spiritual patterns. What humans observed in nature. They created societies to harmonize with that. The sky played a big role, calendars played a big role, weather played a huge role. Believe it or not, there was a time, especially nowadays, if you look at the political milieu of 2020, it's amazing, but believe it or not, there was a time where spiritual initiation, spiritual consciousness, spiritual ability and affinity was a requirement for having a position where a person makes decisions on behalf of other people. In other words, government. A qualification of government, in other words, was spiritual cultivation. That was essential for every indigenous tribe in the world, and for ancient Chinese society as well. The emperor was the gateway to the spiritual realm between heaven and earth. Now, of course, that's an ideal, and there were, in actual de jure, in actual application, there were, of course, emperors that could put on the clothes and do the ceremonies, but didn't have any spiritual affinity, of course. But at least, ideally, one of the qualifications for being a ruler, for making decisions on behalf of other human beings, for making decisions that affect other human beings, one of the qualifications in order to take on that role was that you were supposed to have some form of spiritual initiation, some form of spiritual affinity, and harmony with nature, an ability to read the patterns of nature. The emperor was supposed to be able to read the signs. They were really focused. A big part of their lives was devoted to reading omens, positive and negative, comets and dragon sightings and weather and all kinds of omens. They were omen readers as well, as were chiefs before them. So not just metaphorical, mythological stuff, but also just a harmony with nature. And so that was a requirement. It wasn't always legitimate. It wasn't always real, but at least it was a value of the society, right? Just like in our society, we want a politician to be honest and have our interests and not be corrupt. But then in actual fact, there are some that can stand on a stage and talk like they have our values and interests in their hearts, but actually behind the scenes they're corrupt. But at least our society values on the outside the ideal that those who govern should have the interests of the people in their hearts. So in those times, the ideal was that if you're going to be in a position where you make decisions on behalf of other people, you should have passed through some form of spiritual initiation. You should have, some kind of affinity with nature. So we have the ability to make abstract thought, to see patterns in a universe that is constantly changing, right? To see its cycles, its laws, and begin to experiment and learn more. And then we create systems of living based on those natural patterns, and our heart and our spirit and its relation to spirit, capital S. And then the third stage is that the systems move more and more and more, especially in the last 300 years, to completely human, mind-made systems without any connection to natural patterns or natural rhythms. Nowadays, we want to farm according to our calendar, not the world's calendar. We want to use fertilizers and pesticides and weed killers to force things to grow when we want them to grow on our schedule, not on nature's. We want to live according to clocks, right? The Native Americans famously always used to joke, white men don't even know when he's hungry. He must look at watch to know when to eat. So we want to live according to our arbitrary clocks as opposed to cosmic clocks. We want, and more mind-made system, completely ensorcelled by thought. And this is a metaphor for us as individuals as well, this sweeping history. And to add another analogy, I like analogies, I like metaphors, to smear another analogy on top of this one, human thought is kind of analogous to colonial societies. Like arbitrarily, I don't mean this out of any disrespect for modern Spanish people, but arbitrarily let's take like the Spanish Empire and its conquest of Central America and South America, but let's just focus on Central America. The mind is a bit like that. It comes to this indigenous society and imposes its ways, but also does so with real benefits. Twinkle, 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 twinkle. Right? So it's not as if this flow from our ability to be sentient, to see abstract thought, to then a system of living where we're humans, but we're basing our system of living on nature, to now divorcing ourselves from nature. And when we divorce ourselves from nature, you have to remember, the more we disconnect with nature and live in thought-based systems, we're also disconnecting from that which is natural in us. And so just as that movement has happened, it has provided us benefits, wonderful benefits, showers, toilets, plumbing, medicine that saves so many lives, on and on and on. The mind provides tremendous amount of benefits, like that colonial society. They've got better technology to give to the natives. But the cost of this cleverness, as you can see, the cost of this cleverness is an increased amnesia. And imagine a life without memory. Memory is a huge part of who we are. It's our identity as individuals. If you could only remember like 30 seconds, imagine what that would be like if you had no memory. The way that, some simple animals don't really have memory. Not in the way that we do. They're very present. But you see, without memory, you can think about what life is like. And if you look at this journey into more and more thought-based world, the cost of this cleverness, the benefit of the cleverness is obvious. Why the mind has ensorcelled us is obvious, because the benefits of what it gives to us are real. And I'm not saying we need to sacrifice those. I'm certainly been accused of anachronism, and I certainly am anachronistic. But I'm not suggesting that we go back to some animal state, or even go back to living naked in the jungle. I'm saying that once you realize that you aren't your thoughts, and you hear that, not because I said so, or because of this philosophy we're talking about, but because you listened, you drank tea, you meditated, you listened, and you realize, I'm not my thoughts. You realize that when the more distant we get from nature and systems of life that are based on the patterns of nature, we are also distancing ourselves from that which is natural in us. To use our second analogy, we are losing connection with our indigenous soul. And we all have an indigenous soul. It doesn't matter what kind of people you are. African, Celtic, Germanic, Asian, all peoples on this earth go back to indigenous people. And we all have an indigenous soul. And just like when those conquistadors come and they force a way of life onto the people, they do so with force, but they also do so with lots of benefits. Technological advancement. But the indigenous soul kind of still stays there. I've traveled pretty extensively in Mexico, and I'll tell you, in many rural places in Mexico, something you might not know is that when you go into the churches, there's often pagan deities like hidden under the altar. So you have an altar of like Mary or Jesus, and then underneath are these like pagan deities that only come out once a year or something. So the indigenous things are still kind of in plain view. Your indigenous soul is still there. It's still in plain view. That which is natural in you, right, is still there. And our ancestors knew how to listen. They had to. In fact, there is a theory that we could not have developed that ability to have abstract thought, that sentience, if we had not been a sandwiched species. In other words, it's hard, the theory suggests, this isn't proven, but the theory suggests that it's hard for an apex being to become sentient. You have to have, in other words, predators chasing you and then prey beneath you. You have to be sandwiched. That creates the context for cerebral evolution. So our ancestors literally, because in other words, they were hunters, but they were also hunted. That meant they had to listen. You have to be alert. on the savannah. There are lions. You have to be alert in the jungle. There are tigers, etc. So there was a listening. There was a reading of natural patterns, of weather, of knowing when a storm was coming. And this is in us. Just a few years ago, we went on our global trip to Chiang Mai, and we were walking in the forest with the little indigenous guide. He was like 17 years old. And he turned to me and said, "The rains will be late this year." And I said, "Oh, what's it?" And he said that last night he was looking at the moon. And now today, as we walked into the jungle, he was listening to the sound of the cicadas. And the cicadas have a short life cycle. And he knew that the relationship between the moon and the cicadas meant that the rains were going to be late. Modern people coming from that completely thought-based way of living, we look at that and we're like, wow. But there's no wow. That's just, he hasn't divorced himself from that which is natural in him. That which is, when you divorce from nature, you divorce from that which is natural and human. You had to be able to smell a mushroom and know if it's the poison kind or not. You had to be listening. You had to be tasting. You had to be listening to the world. And that ability is in us. It's inherent. We are animals, in other words. We are natural beings. And so you have to learn to hear, I am not my thoughts. You have to hear that. My thoughts are not the center of my life. They're actually a conqueror. And once you start to hear that, it's not all peaches and roses. For whatever reason, I heard that at a young age. And so I've spent decades hearing that. And let me tell you, this modern, hyper-rationalistic, thought-based society scathes me. Sometimes it scathes me in a slight itchy way. Other times it's abrasive. Why? Because I'm in a world surrounded by people who don't have the ability to truly see, let alone understand why a person would want to live with spirit in their everyday life. And I don't want to live with spirit in my everyday life because of some foo-foo made up nonsense, or because I'm irrational, or because I don't see the benefits of the mind, but because I see that I am not my thoughts. I'm not my thoughts. When you first start drinking tea and you first start meditating, you're probably coming from a thought-based reality, a thought-based way of living, and you're going to periodically dip into listening and hearing the frequency, the FM 93.5, that you're not your thoughts. Eventually, though, really the goal is to live in that space, even when you think. To relate to thinking from it as opposed to coming from thinking to this. And hopefully as a society, the more people that do that, we can get to a new way of living, not an old way, but a new way with memory. Because again, our cleverness has just cost us amnesia. So we can get to a new way of living that uses natural patterns in ourselves and in others. So that's the first thing that you're listening for, is that I am not my thoughts. And then the second thing to listen for, the second two we don't need to spend as much time with. That's the most important one. But the second thing that you can hear, if you start listening, it's there. Once you hear that you're not your thoughts, you hear connection. You hear that this body is made 50 to 70% of water. The same water that's in the clouds. The same water that's in the rivers. And that I eat the plants, and the plants are in me, and the sun is in me. And that these atoms are literally stardust. They literally come from minerals and stuff that was created in the birth of this solar system. And it was here long before me and will be here long after me. And I'm connected to all of it. We are taught that we're special because we're unique. But actually we're far more special because we're connected to everything. We're connected to all that is. And you can hear that connection. You can. Because you are it. It's not something external to you. And so if you can hear that you're not your thoughts, you can also hear you're connected. That's how you kind of hear the Tao. It's not something that can be known, but it is something that can be realized if you make space from thoughts. And you feel connected. You feel connected. And then the third thing that you can begin to hear that I think is these are the three important things that I think we're listening for. I am not my thoughts, a connection to nature. And third is that which binds nature, that which connects us. That which connects us, every poet, every musician, every being of heart has known since forever that which connects us is love. Gravity is love. That which holds things together is love. And you can call it any word you want, but it's just compassion in a humble way. Nature doesn't lord anything. There's no duality, so it's not like, hey, you, I'll help you. Dogen Zenji, the founder and patriarch of my lineage of Zen, he said that real compassion is like the way that you fluff your own pillow when you're asleep. You're fully asleep and you reach up and fluff your own pillow. Right? You help yourself, but without taking any credit. Right? If the right hand looks at the left hand's burning, the right hand isn't like, I don't know, I could get burned too. Nor does it help and say, yay, I won an award. Right? It's just, it naturally, instinctually helps because there's connection. So when you hear that connection, you hear compassion. When you hear that connection, you see yourself in the life of every bug, in the life of the birds. You see the interbeing. You hear it, see it. I'm using hear, but I mean see, smell. I'm not talking literally with the ears, right? I'm talking about that listening. When you bow, when you learn to bow, you start to hear, I am not my thoughts. You start to hear connection. And when you hear connection, the desire to help others is the same as the desire to help self, because other is self. And the help just comes naturally. There's no need to incite it. Very naturally, you have a desire to help other beings because you do so out of that love. It's a part of that connection, in other words. So these are some things that you can listen for. So first, you have to, though, realize that this is a practice of listening. There's no method to doing that. Anything you add gets in the way. Listening is about decreasing. It's about receptivity, humbleness, reverence. And that energy creates a bow. And when you're bowing, when you can bow, you're really halfway there in tea. When you can bow, I'm talking about that mind. And then I've given you some things to listen for. Listen for the truth. Not because I said, you have to experience these things. You have to hear. And I don't mean with your ears, I mean hear, understand experientially, I am not my thoughts. And thoughts are not the center of my life. Thinking is wonderful. It's a wonderful tool. And that's the reason that it has ensorcelled us. And continues to do so, even though it ensorcels us to many dark places. All the neon shimmering lights just really hide how dark it is. Distract us from how dark it is in this mind-made world that's no longer based on natural patterns. We don't have a natural calendar anymore. We have a computer-based one. We don't have a clock based on the day where the sun is. We have one on our phone, etc., etc. And there's a lot of benefits of that. So it's not about throwing that away. That's why it's ensorcelled us. A big part of why the conquistadors can seduce the indigenous people is because they bring real positive change. That's why this issue is so complicated. You can't just say we should leave those Aboriginal people in wherever, Timbuktu, alone. It's not so simple as that. Because when mainstream society comes, it brings with it benefits like medicines that save their lives, technology that can make it so everybody has food and people aren't dying of starvation, etc. There is positive change in it. The conquistador of the mind brings positive things to your life. But it can do so, that all that cleverness can come at the expense of amnesia. Forgetting the indigenous soul, forgetting who you really are as an animal, as a part of nature. And forgetting all those skills like reading water, reading the sun, listening to the cicadas and knowing when it's going to rain. And I have a question for you, which is just a possibility. Is it possible that when you start listening and you shift to a natural way of life based on natural systems instead of completely thought-based living, is it possible that when you're in nature and you're listening, the way a deer is, very attentively to everything without labeling it, but just letting it in, stream in that receptivity, is it possible for there to be communication? In other words, what I'm saying is, can it talk back? Is that possible? In order to find out, you're going to have to listen. You have to listen to what it's saying. And you're going to have to be receptive. You have to be humble. And you have to be respectful. You have to have respect. Communication starts with respect. You can't really listen if you don't respect, if you're not humble, if you're not receptive. If you think you know, you're not a good listener. So we listen, and we listen to that I'm not my thoughts. We listen and we find connection. We listen and we find love in that connection. These three are really all just one. One listening, one heart of bowing. And this is the practice of tea, the part that can't be taught. The part that method doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you're brewing it. A pot, cup, bowls, mugs, tea bags, doesn't matter. This part of tea, it doesn't matter. It's all about listening. And so that's more of a general approach to listening. What I want to shift to for the end of our conversation before we move to practical things is more of a personal approach to listening. That's what listening gets us in general. And those three, which are really one, I am not my thoughts, connection, and connection is compassion. That insight, that wisdom, that way of living, that way of being, it's accessible to all. It's just a truth, and you have to hear it. And I'm using analogies and signposts and things. All the words I'm saying don't matter. It's really about hearing that starting that I'm not my mind. These thoughts are not who I am, and they're not central to my life. I don't have to dwell in a mind-based reality. Because you see, if I dwell in a mind-based reality, it's all wave business. It's all the business of waves. These waves of Connors and Janoses and Jings, and all these waves and Wudas. And it's all wave business without the inclusion of the sea. Which means without the inclusion of perspective, context, purpose, and destiny map. Which is the segue into the personal aspect of listening, which is navigation, personal navigation. How to go about being you and dealing with the vicissitudes of your life. How to know what to do with your life. both literally, like what job, who to marry, where to live, and also in the bigger ways of how to use that connection and love to serve. Personal navigation is also a huge part of listening and of the benefits of a practice focused on listening, on receptivity. That's the last area I want to talk about briefly before we move on to some practical matters. So in terms of listening, it comes down back to this listening to the patterns in nature. In Chinese, this is called gewu, observing natural patterns, not in the scientific way. This is a form of empiricism, but it's not the empiricism that is reducing the universe to mechanistic principles. That system of empiricism is important. It's an important part of our abilities and what we can do. But that's not really the kind of empiricism I'm talking about. I'm talking about observing patterns in nature that are applicable to how we live our lives as individuals, not searching for mechanistic laws in terms of experimenting and understanding the DNA of creatures or et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about patterns that can help us navigate. Now, before we talk about the patterns that we can use to navigate, there's a more kind of open, elusive, difficult to talk about aspect of navigation that you could call intuition. How'd you know to go there? We say, my gut told me. It's just, I don't know, there's a deep-seated wisdom that isn't about observing patterns, and so can't really be taught. It's not even in the sense of learning to listen better outwardly. But if you do listen better inwardly, I guess it can activate. Very briefly, let me give you the traditional Chinese medicine take on this. Very briefly, I'm oversimplifying again with sweeping metaphors, but in traditional Chinese medicine, the universe and our bodies are composed of three basic energies, the three treasures. So you have Jing, which is, you could say, our genetic light, that which is handed down to us ancestrally. You have a propensity to certain diseases, and there's nothing you can do about that. These are the limitations that came with your genes from your parents and their parents and so on. And this energy is limited. And then the second type of energy is Qi, which is breath, which is the movement of all things. It's the vibration of subatomic particles, it's the movement of blood, it's the inflation of the lungs, it's the movement of the being. And the third type of energy is called Shan, and that's the Holy Ghost, the Spirit. Spirit, capital S. And that's a big part of what we were talking about, listening. We could use that word too instead of listening to nature earlier. Spirit. Living with spirit in the everyday life. So they say that when a being is conceived, the sperm and ovum, at that moment the Shan coming from the stars, which is interesting because we have now scientifically understanding that our atoms, our body, do come from stars, and so that it was associated with starlight is coincidental, I don't know, but powerful. That the Shan comes from the stars, fills the baby grows as pure spirit in the and in physical form in the mother, and it's in a Shan womb, and then the moment of birth is very traumatic and disperses all the Shan from the heart of the baby. Now, in the traditional Chinese approach to life, when the Shan is in the heart, several things happen, but two relative to what we're talking about. One is that the navigation system kicks on, which we'll get back to in a minute, which is called the Ming, the destiny map. You get access to your intuition. You just know where to go and what to do. The second thing that happens is that the eyes light up. It's why Chinese saints are always depicted with glowing eyes. And so put these two together and you get basically in the trauma of birth, the Shan is dispersed from the baby. Where does the baby get its Shan back? Well, from the eyes of its parents. If the parents are whole adults who have Shan in their hearts, then their eyes will be filled with Shan, which is why Chinese people say babies want so much eye contact, so that they're looking always to their parents to get that spirit back into them. Unfortunately, what happens? There's no shun in the parent's eyes, and so there's a vacancy in the baby. Why is there no shun in the parent's eyes? Probably because there was no shun in their parents' eyes. And I don't know where that split happened, the fall of the garden, whatever you want to say, right? But this introduces the disruption, and so shun tonics are things that can help bring the shun back into the heart. Tea is a shun tonic. In fact, the first materia medica to mention its use long ago, literally it said to brighten the eyes. So in other words, to land the shun, the Holy Ghost, in the heart. And when that happens, the eyes light up, which is also what we use to navigate the world. So it's a beautiful analogy. But as I said, the navigation system kicks on. The destiny map kicks on. The shun, and you know kind of what to do, where to go. That's the intuitive part of knowing how to navigate life. That's the intuitive part, is listening inward, right? And with the help of shun tonics. In fact, as we shift now to our discussion of observing patterns and using those patterns to navigate one's personal life, you can see that actually T's pattern and why it was used to do that, Gewu. Gewu was a Neo-Confucian method of observing patterns in nature in order to learn how to navigate one human life and also use those patterns to create societies that are in harmony with nature. And they use tea to do this, to sit and open and go out in nature and observe the patterns. Why? Because tea's pattern is that it takes us inward and opens us up and makes us receptive. In other words, nature is always talking and tea helps us understand what she's saying. That is an objective fact. Tea does that for you and you and you. It does that for anyone who drinks it. It quiets you, it calms you, it opens you up, it makes listening easier. And so that's its pattern. And that's in essence why tea. It's because it's a shun tonic, because it opens up, because it makes receptivity, and you can listen to patterns. So there's a part of navigation that is about listening inward, opening that Ming, and intuition, if you will. And there's another part of navigation that is about recognizing patterns in the world. Again, not observing the world empirically to reduce it to mechanistic principles that we can then use to experiment and create and understand scientific laws that we use then to apply and create technology. This is a different type of empiricism, very different, as I'll show you in a minute. This is about observing patterns. And we could talk about this for weeks. I'm just going to mention just a few brief bits of advice for how to use patterns, how to look at the flow of the world. And if you develop your listening skills through tea and Zen, through meditation and tea, through opening and receptivity and humility and reverence, how to use those patterns to navigate your life. A few tips. First of all, the first thing is that you start to understand that in order to master the patterns of this flow and change, first of all, it's not chaos. There are patterns. That's the first realization. And the first obvious then thing is to learn to go with the flow as opposed to against it. If you want a down-to-earth applicable example of that, this can be even applied to the human milieu, even to the human realm, the thought-based realm, right? Right now, at this stage in 2020, it would be a horrible idea for you to open a restaurant. Investing a bunch of money in a restaurant right at this point, if you already have a restaurant, I pray for you. I hope it survives this troubles we're having. But that's a different story. That's a different type of navigation if you already had one. But creating one right now would be going against the flow. Against the human flow, but also the natural flow, because coronavirus is natural. It comes from nature. We're going to get to that point again in a minute, which is that even though we try to live completely in thought-based reality, we can't ever really escape nature. And so that's why it's better our patterns are in line with nature. So that going against the flow is kind of the first obvious thing. Learning to feel, learning to see where things are going. And in order to do that, you have to listen. You have to be able to hear I am not my thoughts. Why are the thoughts a problem for this? The thoughts are an obstacle for going with the flow, because you see, the first thing that the mind does as it develops the ability to make abstract thoughts, to look at the patterns and see them and see abstract concepts, which is the basis of the language we're using to communicate. It's the basis of your thoughts. It assumes those abstract patterns are real. But they're not. They're just templates in our mind. What's real is the flow of atoms, the flow of nature itself, not the abstract patterns that we write on whiteboards, mathematically or philosophically or whatever we use our rational mind to create patterns, abstract patterns. We start to kind of unconsciously assume that those patterns are real, when actually they're not. They're diagrams, they're charts, they're maps, and the map is not the territory. First of all, the map is an oversimplification. If the map were perfect, it would contain every little detail, and then it would be as big as the world. And second of all, maps always skew things. They have to, right? They turn what is round into flat or whatever. So abstract thoughts, concepts, they are just maps. They aren't reality, but we start to assume that they're real. And there's an implication in this, and that implication is very important. It's deep. All of this stuff is deep, but I'm trying to help you get to a place where you can hear it. But the assumption that then begins to happen is that we start to assume that the changes themselves are normative, that they're like principles that imprint themselves from the outside, that the abstract is changing the flow of the universe. We tend to think that way, that the scientific laws are doing something, that they're imprinting from the outside, that they're normative, controlling, in other words. They're like disembodied forces controlling the changing flow of the universe. When actually the changes aren't that. There's no abstract Platonic noumena outside of reality enforcing and imprinting change onto it. These abstractions are intellectual abstractions only from the world to our minds. And actually, changes are implicit. They are inner tendencies that grow out of the tendency of those phenomena. They come from within. The tree grows that way from within, not because it's forced to do so from an outward abstract law. That law is built in other words, coming from the inside out. I hope this makes sense. Yeah? When you're really invested in thought-based living, you start to kind of unconsciously assume that change in the world is happening from outside, normative, controlling, disciplining outer forces, when in actually the laws are built in. They're coming from the inside out. All the change that is happening in the world is coming from spontaneous tendencies within the phenomena themselves, inward. And when you understand that, it's easier to, in yourself and through listening, to be in a state where you're going with the flow as opposed to against it. Then the next navigational skills, which are, we can go through more briefly, the second great navigational skill that you can use to guide your life is to understand the importance of seeds, right? So the first thing is to begin to feel the flow. And not having any context, being all in the business of the waves without any ocean, means that you will assume that that the changes are happening from without, that the abstract is what you should be focusing on, when actually you should be focusing on the flow itself. And that's where you'll get the patterns from, right? So then you'll be more in the flow. That's the first principle of navigation, going with the flow. and I'm helping you to help start to realize how to go with the flow, which is back to our earlier thing. Listen and I'm not my thoughts, because the thoughts trap me in abstract, purely intellectual patterns, as opposed to the actual inner tendencies within things and that connection to them. That's how you be in the flow. Okay? The way that an athlete does, or a dancer, or whatever. The second thing is the importance of seeds. It's all about seeds. You want to be a master of your life, you want to be a master of navigation, be a master of seeds. Seeds and sprouts. What do I mean? I mean that a seed develops in the flow of change that is this universe. It develops, it opens, it sprouts, it grows into a plant. It develops in this flow of change. And we have the ability to introduce seeds. And the introduction of seeds is 95% of navigation. 95% of what you're navigating now is the plants that grew out of the seeds you planted in the past. You created habits, including the habit of more and more investing more of your heart and more of your time in thought-based living, in assuming that your thoughts are central to who you are. And that habit has now created trees that you now have to navigate through to get back to the place where you can hear again. So those obstacles that you created were created by your past selves and the seeds they planted. And the seeds you plant today will be what you navigate tomorrow. And this is little things. If you exercise 5 minutes a day and you add 5 minutes every day, by the end of the year, you're exercising hours a day. You're in great shape. These seeds are little. That's the point. The master of navigation focuses on what is small. Seeds and sprouts. Careful about what seeds you plant and where you plant them. And then sprouts, when they're little, they are easy to influence. All kinds of things are very easy to influence when they're small in your life. When things grow up big, it's not that we ignore them, but now they are challenges. They are obstacles. They are things the only thing we navigate is back to that flow. The man of the Tao retreats to his sphere of influence. There's nothing we can do about the big trees other than avoid them. Use them, avoid them, anchor yourself to them, go around them. But they're not easily changed because they're now trees. So focus on seeds, focus on sprouts, and your only focus in terms of trees is how to navigate around them. That's the way that it is. So if you can listen to the patterns and do so in a way of like an intuitive way, and then you can also get out of abstract thinking and start to realize that change happens from within. It's a tendency implicit in everything as opposed to an imprint from outside. And if you can pay more attention to seeds and sprouts, all the little things in your life, little teeny habits, little teeny changes, little teeny things, that's what tea's all about. It's not about big stuff. That will result in the big forest when you focus on all these little things. So that's the kind of navigation personally. So listening provides us with these general insights into reality and our lives, that I'm not my thoughts, that I'm connected, that connection brings compassion. And through that, I start to realize that nature is not a bunch of abstract laws, it's a bunch of inner tendencies. And I have those inner tendencies in me just like every tree and plant. I have instincts, in other words. I have intuition, and I can hear it and utilize it to go with the flow. And then I can also use my mind, my rational mind, to observe nature, not just in a mechanistic way, the way a scientist would. And I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying I can also use my empiricism, my senses, to observe the patterns in nature in order to guide my life. And then to do that, I have to be master of the seeds. Pay attention to the very small decisions in your life every day, because what seeds you plant will be the plants of tomorrow. And then when they're sprouts, you can still control them. You can still garden. Once they're giant trees, now it's just how to navigate around them. There's nothing to be done. You see, so all of our work has to be we are gardeners. We have to be careful about the seeds we plant and be careful about tending the sprouts of those seeds. So my first teacher always said, if there are neem seeds, neem's a bitter plant in India, and there are orange seeds. If you want to live in an orange grove, don't plant neem seeds. And if you're living in a big neem forest, the reason you're living in a neem forest is because you planted lots of neem trees. In a bitterness, in other words. So plant more oranges and pay attention to the sprouts, weeding and watering the good ones. This is navigation. And this will create the conditions for your movement. So all of this really is unteachable. It all comes through listening. It all comes through receptivity. And that's our heaven for today. It's a little bit longer of a heaven. In the coming days, it'll be a little bit more equal, half and half, half heaven, half practical. Today, I just want to talk about one or two things. The first is how to hold the bowl. So we're going to come down to earth now. We've been up in heaven. You can absorb as much of that heaven as you can, but it doesn't really matter in terms of this first lesson, because this whole foundation of tea is about listening. I can't fill you with it. So if you take my words and just go blah, 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 and get rid of them, you're actually closer to it. Because I'm talking about listening. I'm talking about being a student. I'm talking about opening. I'm talking about reverence. I'm talking about humility. I'm talking about receptivity. I'm talking about this. That's tea. And it's in your heart. It's not in my words. It's not in teaching. It's not in a book. It's not in a course. It's in you. No method is needed. Any tea, anywhere, any kind, any place can facilitate the foundation of tea, which is listening, bowing, getting to that state of mind, restoring that which is natural in you. So you can restore your connection to nature, and through that wisdom, restore your compassion and love. So the skill I want to talk about, the first skill you need is how to hold the bowl. How to hold the bowl. The first thing, and you will see, by the way, that as we travel through this 7 days of course, all of the practical things that we're going to talk about, you'll see in a very real way they're rooted in this foundation of listening, of humility, receptivity, and reverence. They're all rooted in that. So the how to hold a bowl is basically starts with the question, how do I hold it most reverently? But again, you don't need a method to hold the bowl not to be able to listen. But the more you listen to tea, the more you hear the natural ways and patterns of relating to tea that come out of reverence, respect, receptivity, and humility. And also some practical things like ergonomics, etc. So holding the bowl starts with using two hands. Why? Because two hands is more respectful than one. If you shake anyone's hand on earth, you shake with one, you shake with two, there's more feeling in two. There's more feeling in this than in this. It's not to say there's no feeling in this, there's more in this. Two hands, always two hands when we hold the bowl. Then you start to go deeper. And so the way that we're going to hold the bowl is the offhand. So if you're right-handed like me, that would be your left hand. If you're left-handed, that would be your right hand. Your offhand is the foundation. And the bowl is going to go, for most people, there's going to be some adjustment based on the size of your hands. But the bowl is going to go, for most people, most comfortably in the place right where the middle two fingers meet the hand. And we're going to put it right there, and then the thumb comes on the rim. Now, the hand is straight. The hand is straight. So there's no curve. I'm not doing this, right? I'm keeping it straight. And this hand's the foundation. This hand is the guide. And it's like a crab's claw. And it's also, you can see my fingers are together. Not pressed, not tight, but together. Same here. And this hand is going to come like this and hold the bowl like this. And this is how we hold the bowl. And Now, of course, we want our shoulders and neck to be straight. Holding the bowl like this automatically helps you to sit up, which means when you sit up, you're going to listen more. And we're going to bring the bowl from our heart to our mouth. When you bring the bowl from your heart to your mouth, you automatically, your shoulders and your elbows and everything finds its right place. We do that like this, see? It's a good idea to not set the bowl down until the tea's all gone. You can take as long as you want, but holding it like this for as long as you can and just sitting with it, listening, opening, noticing how you open more, bowl after bowl, listen more and more. And listening, and we hold it like this. Then when it comes time to set it down or pick it up, the two hands are going to reverse. So now this hand, the offhand, is a foundation, and this hand is a guide. There's actually a lot of deep levels to this because my offhand is yin, but in this case it's performing a yang function, which is grounding the yin. And my strong hand is yang, but in this case it's performing the act of guide, which is yin, which brings the yang down. So it's bringing balance to everything by doing things this way. When we go to pick it up and set it down, though, we're going to reverse the roles. So right now this is the foundation and this is the guide. And that is actually applicable in the drinking. Because when we're drinking, the foundation is pushing the bowl to our face and the guide is tilting it, right? That allows gravity to let the tea go into your body. So there's one kind of slurping. We slurp because things are hot. There's another kind of slurping, which is a slurping because we're trying to suck the liquor straight up because we're holding the bowl flat. We don't want to do that. You want to tilt the bowl. Tilt the bowl. It's subtle, but you tilt the bowl with the guide and the liquor goes into your mouth naturally. So foundation is pushing and guide is tilting. Pushing, tilting. Just by doing this, you'll notice the tea goes into your body much more smoothly, much more naturally, much more with much more receptivity, much more listening. Again, all those principles are the foundation of practical things. So when we go to set it down, though, we're gonna switch that. So this guide hand is now going to become the foundation. This is the foundation. This is the guide. Now this becomes the foundation, and this is going to become the guide. This becomes the guide by slipping off of the bottom to the side of the bowl, like this, and guiding it down. Foundation is setting it down. This hand is guiding it down. Same with picking it up. Like this is like this now as a guide is like a ramp. So it's coming up the ramp, bloop, 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 with this foundation, and now they're switching. This is foundation. This is guide. Now they're switching. This is guide, and this is guide. This is foundation. Foundation, guide. Now foundation, guide, right? Or you could say, right? You could say yang, yin, right? Yang, yin. Yeah, okay? Holding the bowl like this will help you to sit upright, help you to listen more, help to open up all of the insights we've been talking about in terms of general insights that you can listen for, and also personal navigation that you can utilize to travel. And really, that's all you need to get started, is that the idea that this practice is about moving things away. It's about small things, not big things. The listening is in the moment. All the philosophy we talked about earlier, it may seem big and heavenly, and it is when you talk about it. But in application, it's about seeds and sprouts. It's about little things. It's about the moment. And listening is about clearing away thoughts and concepts. There's no way to teach it. It's an emptying. There's no way to talk about it. And so all you really need is a bowl and some leaves, and that, really reduces everything to very simple form. Put some leaves in a bowl, add some hot water, and hold the bowl properly. And notice how holding the bowl properly isn't some normative imprint from the outside. It's not a pattern imposed from the outside, from the abstract. It's not something that Buddha made up and then imposed on people to do in some way just for arbitrary reason. But rather, it's the tendency within that act. In other words, Holding it that way facilitates listening, which facilitates holding it that way. The more you hold it that way, the more you hear tea, the more you hear yourself, the more you hear nature, and the more you hear nature, the more you understand why you're to hold it that way. In other words, you become sensitive to your own hands and energy in your body and understand that holding it this way actually does way more than even what Buddha said. You start hearing, feeling, sensing more reasons why we hold it that way. Reasons that can't even be articulated. Do you see? And so, and also holding it that way facilitates the listening. So every practice is like this, like meditation or tea. It's a cycle. The more you do it, the better you listen. The better you listen, the more you understand why you do it. And it feeds itself, right? So you want to open, you want to be receptive, humble, and reverent. And so you hold the bowl like this, and then you start to realize that, wow, holding the bowl like this opens me up more. And the more open you get, then the more sensitive you get to the micro reasons why we hold the bowl like that. And you realize that holding the bowl like that came out of the nature of bowls. It really came out of when even humans were using their hands to drink before there were bowls. Right? For some reason, some people want to naturally grab the bowl like this. This has a lot of problems though. First of all, it's difficult to set down because my hands are in the way. And I have to set it down, I have to like pick it up like this, and I have to do like this, and then it's awkward. Whereas when I do it my way, right, you see these are the hinges of my body. When we do it the way that I've been describing, which is the way that it should be done, these are the hinges of my body. Pick it up and put it down. Secondly, of course, though, holding it like this, the bowl is hot. Whereas when I put it up onto my hand straight, remember the hand is straight, right, like this, right? If it is very hot because you don't have the right kind of bowl, the right kind of bowl it'll have a thick enough foot, so it won't get too hot. But some bowls, maybe you're using a rice bowl, which is fine. Then you can bring it out to the edge of the fingers. If it's still too hot, go up onto the tips of the fingers. If it's still too hot, you can dance and kind of make this hand the foundation. But that's not ideal because you're now reversing the roles, you see. Ideal is that it's in, this hand is straight, this hand is here, and we're going from the heart to the mouth, and just say it. There's nothing really else to begin a tea practice other than listening, other than becoming more of a student of, well, for now, a student in this moment, a student of Buddha, but that's not what it's about. Learn to be a student of Buddha is to be a student of Tea and Zen, because I'm a student of Tea and Zen. We already went over this. And so together we are students of Tea and Zen, and then through being students of Tea and Zen, we are students of nature, students of the indigenous soul, students of that which is natural in us, students of the patterns of this world as it is. So all that listening is available through these small seeds, small little things, like every day sitting and drinking tea. In these 2-hour broadcasts, we're mostly going to be having teachings. You can drink tea while you listen. You can also drink tea for an hour beforehand, etc., etc. But holding the bowl is really all you need to get started. It's just to hold the bowl and to listen, open up, and become receptive, become humble, and become reverent. If you want a little bit of extra credit, it may sound absurd, but it is not absurd to your indigenous soul. Again, earlier I asked, is it possible that instead of in this thought-based reality of telling the world what we want it to do all the time, we could communicate, listen? Is it possible to hear? Is it possible for it to talk back? Certainly it is for every child on earth. If there's a child in your life, a little child, ask them. You know, if you say to a little person, go say hello to that stone, they won't hesitate. If they do hesitate, it's not because they're opposed to saying hello to stones, it's because they don't want to do what you say. And you had that in you too. So an extra credit homework is to introduce yourself to tea. Why not? I'm not suggesting tea speaks English, but you do. And tea might speak listening. I already told you that's its pattern. It makes that in all people. That's why it's been used by Taoists to connect to nature, by Confucius to practice Gewu, seeing the patterns of how to live as an individual and as a society, and as by Buddhists as well, to engender mindfulness as a meditation practice. And by Aboriginal people in shamanistic healing ways. So its pattern is to listen. It speaks listening. But why not introduce yourself out loud or in your mind? Why not just, as I said, the gesture of the bow is not important. The energy behind the bow is important. Like a smile. You can smile for political reasons. And it's not real, right? The real smile is a feeling first and then an involuntary expression, just like a real bow. However, you can sometimes stimulate the feeling through the gesture. If you smile enough, even though you don't feel it, you might start to feel happy. If you bow enough physically, you might start to feel that receptivity, humility, and reverence. So that's what the exercise of introducing yourself. It might do that. It might open you up. It might, hey, my name is Wuda. I'm here to listen to you. I'm here to learn from you. Here to honor you. However you want to introduce yourself, right? Each day I'm going to give you some homework. I have the sheet here. This will be up on the course website. Some exercises, some questions to contemplate, and some things to discuss. Today's forum discussions, the heaven will be about listening, receptivity, and reverence, about bowing, and about navigation in one's life. And the earth, the practical, will be about holding the bowl. If you have any questions about holding the bowl, or you want to discuss holding the bowl, or the changes when you start holding the bowl properly. The questions to contemplate for today, the first question always, the first question and the most primary question of all in Zen, always question number one, who is asking? Who is asking? Who are you? That's question one. Question two, is there stillness in motion? And question three, I already mentioned, which is it possible, the rivers, the mountains, the clouds, the world is alive, is it possible that they have a kind of feeling and that they want to be included in decisions that impact them? Is that possible? I'm not even saying is it there. I'm saying is it possible? Can you communicate with the world as opposed to bossing it around? Can something come in through the listening? And if it's not possible, then why? Why not? Why don't you see that? Here's some exercises. First exercise is going to be the meditation instructions. Meditation is even more central than tea to this ability of listening. My teacher always used to say there are 3 wonderful spiritual techniques that you can choose from to cultivate yourself. All of them work. They're all wonderful. Meditation, meditation, or meditation. If you're practicing tea in this tradition, you're meditating, hopefully 2 hours a day at least, or work your way up. Again, little seeds. Start 5 minutes, go to 10, go to 20, right? I've given you an hour-long meditation instructions. They'll be up on the site. You can listen to them twice a day, ideally for these 7 days. If not, once, or listen to part of them. It's up to you, but try to find them. And another thing, during your tea, I've given an exercise here. Can you find the place where sensory impressions meet interpretation? Try that. Can you find the place where sound meets interpretation of sound, where the sound, the waves of woof, woof, meet the mind saying dog, barking, I don't like it. The mind interprets the sound, gives it a name, and then evaluates it as a nice sound or an unpleasant sound, or smell or taste or whatever. Sound is probably a good one, the best one to start. Can you find the place where sensory impressions meet interpretation? And try maybe that in a tea session. Drink tea for an hour. The other thing that is really powerful, to this exercise of listening is, if you can, to have a tea session in nature, using the time to listen very carefully and attentively with your ears. I know listening is more of a metaphor. It's about the whole being, but the ears are very powerful. And so use the ears to listen to nature without any thought, without any labeling, without calling it anything, without saying that's a dog or that's a this or that. Just sound, just listen. And what you're doing with this exercise isn't about what you hear. It's about listening better, being more open. If you cannot right now get out into nature, I'm going to give you a really amazing link on the internet. I'm going to give you a link to a website that is literally, it's amazing. I use it often. It's literally an interactive map with little points all over the world, including Taiwan, if you want. And you click on any of these little points on this map, on this interactive map, and you can hear the sounds of nature in that place. So there's one for Taiwan, you click on it and then you press play and it plays the nature sounds of Yangmisan here in Taiwan. And there's one for rainforest, there's all over the world. So you could literally travel sonically to anywhere in this world and listen to nature. So if you can't go out in nature and have a tea session, then you can certainly put a computer or some kind of Bluetooth speaker or something and go to this website. We're going to give you the link and choose anywhere you want in the world. Come to Taiwan, go to Brazil, wherever you like, and listen to nature. And again, practice opening, practice listening itself, not what you're listening to, but just the act of listening. Finally, the slogan for today, the slogan is communicate with the world. Communicate with the world. We talked a lot about this. This is about, instead of living in thought-based reality where we tell the world what to do, can we communicate with the world? Communicate with the world. And communication, my friends, is far more about listening than it is about talking. I'll leave you with a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, one of my favorites. He says, "It took me 5 years to learn to speak the English language and 50 to learn to hear it." Thank you so much for this beautiful first day. This is going to be such an exciting course. I can't wait to see you guys. A lot of what's going to make this course so wonderful is if you guys participate in the forum, if you ask questions, if you share your experiences, share your efforts in doing these homework and your experiences doing these homeworks and questions, and interact and make this an interactive course, because we can't be together. So we got to really use the website, use the forums, use these tools, all these tools that I've given you. And remember the takeaway from today, it's all about listening. It's all not really teachable. It's all, the foundation of tea is in the tea itself. And may you find it today before we move on to tomorrow. Thank you so much.